Replacement property identification. Let's spend a little time on replacement property identification because it's really important. And the reason it's important is this. For those few exchanges that fail, they often fail because of deficiencies or discrepancies in the identification of replacement properties. So it's really worth your time to understand identification, okay? First off is this. After the sale of your relinquished or exchanged property, you are required to identify candidate or target replacement property or properties. And the rules regarding your identification require that this identification be made in writing within 45 days of the transfer of the relinquished property. Now, if you've sold more than one asset or property, the 45-day period actually starts when the first asset transfers. Earlier I mentioned that the identification had to be in writing. Well, this is how that's done. You may make the identification to your qualified intermediary or facilitator or one of the other parties to the exchange. For instance, your closer, settlement agent, escrow holder, or the seller of the prospective replacement property. We actually have the capability to identify digitally with our online identification tool. So if you're on vacation in Europe and your 45th day is coming up, you can log in and identify that way. You can also mail it or fax it, but make sure it's received. It's also important to remember that once you have made an identification and your 45th day has elapsed, it cannot be changed. This is why you need to make sure that you can acquire the property or properties that you identify. Now, I mentioned that once the 45 days has expired, your time to identify has expired as well. Here's one caveat. If you are still within the 45-day identification window, it is possible to revoke a previous identification and re-identify. This is helpful in those instances where maybe a property that you had an interest in is no longer available, but you still want to have some flexibility in what you might purchase. Now, the last thing that you should understand is that your identification can affect the disbursement of your exchange funds in certain situations. We call these situations the G6 restrictions, and they are important. You need to be aware of them. For instance, if you do not identify potential replacement property in the 45-day period, your facilitator is required by law to return those funds to you on day 46. If, however, you do identify replacement property, you must wait until you complete your exchange or until the expiration of the 180-day exchange period before you receive your exchange funds. And that is identification.